At 6:42 on the morning of July 30th, 1943, Second Lieutenant Bond Fox climbed into the left seat of a B-17 flying fortress named Tondaleo, watching ground crews pull the wheel chocks away as 18 other bombers around him prepared for a mission most of them would not survive. Fox was 24 years old. He had flown 12 combat missions. He had 0 confirmed kills. That morning, the Luftwaffe had scrambled nearly 40 fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s, to intercept the American formation. The target lay deep in central Germany, Nazi aircraft engine production facilities, heavily defended and vital to the German war effort. There would be no fighter escort. American P-47 Thunderbolts could barely reach the Dutch coast before turning back. Beyond that point, German fighters would have free rein over the bomber stream for nearly 3 hours. Tondaleo belonged to the 379th Bomb Group, 527th Bomb Squadron, based at Kimbolton, England. Of the 12,732 B-17s built during the war, 4,750 would be shot down, more than a third. The crews had a name for it: the flying coffin. In 1943, casualty rates on deep penetration raids hovered near 30%. A full tour required 25 missions. The mathematics were simple. Fly into Germany 25 times without long-range fighter cover, and statistics said you would die before finishing. Every pilot knew it. Since May, the 379th alone had lost 23 B-17s. 82 men killed or missing. Crews watched bombers beside them disintegrate in midair. Watched parachutes blossom against black flak bursts. Watched burning fortresses spiral toward German soil with men screaming inside. In Tondaleo's nose sat Elmer Bendiner, bombardier by position, navigator by training. He was 23 years old. 12 missions completed. On the previous raid, he had watched a B-17 break apart at 30,000 feet. The top turret gunner had been blown completely out of the fuselage. Bendiner could still see the dark red streak smeared along the bomber's side where the man's blood had sprayed before the slipstream carried it away. At 7:15, the formation climbed through the English cloud layer. 186 B-17s, arranged in tight combat boxes. Each carried 10 men. 1,860 Americans flying toward Germany in aircraft that cruised at 150 miles per hour, while German fighters attacked at more than 400. At 9 o'clock, the P-47s peeled away over the Dutch coast, fuel exhausted. The bombers continued alone. Fox held Tondaleo steady in formation. The intercom stayed silent. Every man scanned the sky. The first fighters appeared at 9:45. Messerschmitts diving from altitude. Focke-Wulfs attacking head-on. The formations. 50 caliber guns opened fire simultaneously. Tracers crisscrossed the sky. Spent brass clattered against aluminum floors. German 20mm cannons fired explosive shells. One hit could tear off a wing, rupture a fuel tank, ignite the bomb bay, killing everyone aboard in less than a second. At 10 o'clock, a Messerschmitt rolled inverted above Tondaleo and fired a 3-second burst. Cannon shells walked across the bomber's right wing. The number 3 engine erupted in flame. Fox feathered the propeller and triggered the fire suppression system. The fire died. The engine stayed dead. Then the waste guns stopped firing. Both of them. Bendiner called back over the intercom. No response. The tail gunner's voice came next, tight, controlled. Both waist gunners were down. Killed instantly when cannon fire punched through the fuselage wall and found them at their stations. At 10:21, Tondaleo reached Castle. German flak batteries opened fire. The sky filled with black bursts. The formation flew straight and level, no evasive action during the bomb run. The bombardiers needed stability. At 10:24, Bendiner released the bombs. 2 tons of high explosives fell toward the factories below. The instant the bomb bay doors closed, Fox banked hard right. The formation turned for home. A Focke-Wulf Fw-190 attacked from 5 o'clock low. Its cannons slammed into Tondaleo's left wing. Fox felt the impacts through the control yoke. The aircraft shuddered but held together. Fuel pressure gauges flickered, then stabilized. The wing tanks had been hit, but nothing exploded. Somehow, the fuel wasn't pouring out. Somehow, the aircraft stayed airborne. The return flight took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Tondaleo flew on 3 engines. The formation stayed tight. Stragglers died. German fighters prowled for wounded aircraft that fell behind. At 12:55, the bombers crossed the Dutch coast outbound. The P-47s met them there. American fighters formed a protective screen. The Messerschmitts turned back toward Germany. Fox nursed Tondaleo across the North Sea. Fuel pressure remained steady. Whatever had struck the wing tanks hadn't ruptured the self-sealing bladders. Luck, or something else. The English coast appeared at 13:32. Fox lowered the landing gear over Kimbolton at 13:58. Tondaleo rolled onto the runway with both waist gunners dead inside the fuselage. Ground crews surrounded the aircraft immediately. Fox and Bendiner climbed out through the nose hatch. They walked around the bomber in silence. 47 cannon strikes. The left wing looked as if it had been attacked with an axe. Metal peeled back in jagged tears. Hydraulic fluid dripped onto the concrete. At 14:20, the ground crew chief arrived. Staff Sergeant Paul Morrison, 31 years old. He had been maintaining B-17s at Kimbolton since the group arrived. He knew what damage should kill a crew, and what should not. Morrison climbed onto the left wing and studied the holes. He called down to Fox that he needed to inspect the fuel tanks before signing off on repairs. Standard procedure. Fox went to debriefing. He reported the mission in clinical terms. Target bombed. 2 crew killed. 1 engine out. 47 hits. Aircraft returned. At 15:45, Fox returned to his quarters and tried to sleep. He couldn't. The images of the waist gunners kept replaying. 2 men alive at breakfast, dead by lunch. Morrison and his crew worked on Tondaleo until nearly midnight. They drained the left-wing fuel tanks. The self-sealing bladders were intact. That was unusual. Then, at 2300 hours, Morrison's flashlight beam caught something metallic lodged inside the number 2 tank. Not shrapnel. Too regular. Too intact. He reached in carefully and pulled it free. A 20mm German cannon shell. Unexploded. His hands began to shake. He found another. Then another. By 23:40, 11 shells lay in a neat row on the wing. 11 high-explosive rounds that had penetrated an aviation fuel tank and failed to detonate. That wasn't luck. Morrison walked to the squadron commander's office and reported what he'd found. The commander stared at him for 10 seconds, then picked up the phone. He called base intelligence. Told them to come immediately. Told them to bring ordnance disposal tools. Told them this could not wait until morning. By 0:15 on July 31st, Intelligence Officer Captain Robert Hayes arrived with 2 EOD armorers. They began carrying the shells away, one at a time. Carefully, the armorers treated every shell as if it could detonate with the slightest vibration. Standard procedure for unexploded ordnance called for X-ray examination, identify the fuse type, confirm the explosive charge, plan the defusing method. Kimbolton had no X-ray equipment. Captain Robert Hayes, base intelligence officer, would have to open them blind. He began at 0:45. Using precision tools, Hayes carefully unscrewed the base plate of the first 20mm cannon shell. He worked slowly. Every armorer knew the stories: shells detonating during defusal, men killed by the very ordnance they were trying to make safe. After 6 minutes, the base plate came free. Hayes shone a flashlight inside. Nothing. No explosive charge. No fuse assembly. No primer. The interior walls were clean aluminum. No residue. No fragments. He checked again. Tilted the shell. Looked for any trace of explosive material. There was none. This shell had been manufactured, painted, belt-fed into a German fighter, fired at a B-17, penetrated a fuel tank, and contained absolutely nothing capable of exploding. Hayes set it aside. The second shell, empty. The third, empty. The fourth, empty. He worked through all 11 shells in 43 minutes. Every single one was hollow. At 1:30, Hayes stopped and stared at the row of casings laid out on the workbench. This was not a manufacturing defect. Defects were random. This was systematic. Someone had deliberately built these shells to be inert. Someone inside a German munitions factory had sabotaged Luftwaffe ammunition production. The implications were enormous. If one batch had been sabotaged, how many others existed? How many German fighters were flying with ammunition that would never explode? How many Allied crews had survived without ever knowing why? Hayes examined the casings under magnification, manufacturer stamps, batch numbers, inspection marks. All standard. Nothing unusual. Nothing that revealed where they were made or who made them. At 2:15, Hayes picked up the 11th shell, the last one pulled from Tondeleo's fuel tank. He unscrewed the base plate. The threads were tight. Factory sealed. At 2:18, the base came free. The interior looked identical, empty, clean. Then Hayes noticed something different. A small object wedged near the nose cone. Not metal, paper. Using tweezers, he extracted a tightly rolled slip, carefully hidden inside the shell before the base plate had been sealed, placed where only someone defusing the round would ever find it. Hayes unrolled the paper beneath the work light. Handwriting. Not German. Not French. Slavic characters. Czech or Polish. At 2:25, Hayes went to the base communications office and woke the night duty officer. He asked if anyone on base spoke Czech or Polish. Calls were made. At 2:50, Technical Sergeant Jan Novak arrived. Born in Prague, immigrated to the United States in 1938. Hayes handed him the paper. Novak read it once. Then again. His hands began to shake. Tears welled in his eyes. He looked up at Hayes and translated the message into English. 7 words. 7 words that explained everything. This is all we can do for you now. Written in Czech. 7 words from someone who would never be known. 7 words from a forced laborer inside a Nazi munitions factory. Someone who knew discovery meant execution, not only for themselves, but likely for their family. A message that traveled from occupied Czechoslovakia to a German factory, to a fighter aircraft over Kassel, into a B-17 fuel tank, and finally onto a workbench in England. Hayes stood silent for nearly a minute. Then he asked Novak to write down the translation. This was evidence. This was intelligence. This had to reach headquarters. At 3:15, Hayes drove to the 379th Group headquarters and woke Colonel Maurice Preston. He showed him the 11 empty shell casings and the translated message. Preston read the note 3 times. Asked Hayes to repeat everything. Where the shells were found, how many, how Tondaleo had survived hits that should have destroyed her. Hayes gave exact details. 11 shells. Left-wing fuel tank. Direct hits. 0 detonations. At 3:32, Preston picked up the phone and called 8th Air Force Intelligence at High Wycombe. He reported evidence of systematic sabotage in German ammunition and recommended immediate investigation of all recovered unexploded Luftwaffe ordnance. The duty officer logged the report at 3:40, assigned case file 073043, and ordered inspections across 8th Air Force units. By 4 o'clock, Hayes returned to Tondaleo. Morrison's crew had finished draining the tanks. No additional shells were found. Only the 11 that had saved the aircraft and everyone aboard. At 4:30, intelligence officers took custody of the shells. They were photographed, cataloged, and sealed in storage. The message and translation were sent to headquarters by courier. No one told Fox. Operational security required absolute silence. If crews were captured, any knowledge of sabotage could compromise interrogations. The Germans could not be allowed to suspect their forced laborers. Fox learned the truth 35 years later. In the summer of 1978, living in Tarrytown, New York, he told Elmer Bendiner what had really happened. The fuel tanks hadn't survived by luck or divine intervention. They had survived because someone inside the Nazi war machine had chosen defiance. In occupied Europe, by 1943, Germany had enslaved nearly 7 million foreign workers, Czechs, Poles, French, Dutch, Belgians, forced to build the weapons meant to kill Allied airmen. Some resisted in the only way left to them, by making ammunition that would never explode, and by leaving a message, knowing it might never be found. The Skoda works in occupied Czechoslovakia employed more than 40,000 workers under direct German supervision. The factories produced artillery shells, tank components, small arms, and ammunition, critical output for the Wehrmacht. Security was absolute. SS guards monitored every shift. Production quotas were enforced without exception. Missed targets meant reduced rations. Repeated failures meant deportation. Deportation often meant death. The Germans faced a problem they could not solve. They needed skilled labor. Precision weapons required trained machinists, men and women who understood tolerances, metallurgy, and assembly processes developed over years. Threats could coerce obedience, but they could not replace expertise. The war did not allow time to train new workers. Some resistance was open. Workers refused orders. Equipment was smashed. Tools disappeared. The SS responded immediately. Public executions, bodies hung in factory courtyards as warnings. Open resistance died quickly. What remained was quieter. Invisible sabotage. Defects engineered to escape detection. Flaws that passed inspection and failed only under combat stress. A bolt drilled a millimeter off-center. A rivet weakened just enough to shear under load. A tank transmission that functioned perfectly until it didn't. A German vehicle broke down at the worst possible moment. A wing failed under combat strain. A gun jammed. A shell did not explode. Ammunition sabotage was the simplest. Explosive filler was added late in the manufacturing process. A worker could polish the casing, assemble the fuse, seal the base plate, and never insert the explosive compound. The shell looked perfect, weighed nearly the same, passed visual inspection. Only firing revealed the truth. Post-war intelligence estimates concluded that 5 to 15% of German ammunition produced in occupied territories contained defects. Some accidental, most deliberate. Millions of shells that failed to explode. Millions of lives quietly saved. The worker who hid the message inside that shell would never know the outcome. Never know that Tondaleo survived Kassel. Never know that 11 empty shells had been found. Never know that their act had been documented. By the time von Fox learned the truth in 1978, the Czech worker was almost certainly dead, executed, deported, or lost to the war. Tondaleo flew 6 more missions after Kassel. Elmer Bendiner navigated each one. He watched B-17s explode beside them. Watched crews bail out over Germany. Watched the lucky ones make it home. The mathematics never changed. Every mission reduced the odds. On September 6, 1943, Tondaleo took off for Stuttgart. The target was an aircraft component factory. Fighter opposition was heavy over France. Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, wave after wave. The number 4 engine was hit. Then number 3. Fox struggled to hold altitude on 2 engines. At 12,000 feet over the English Channel, the remaining engines failed, fuel exhaustion compounded by battle damage. The aircraft could not remain airborne. Fox gave the order. Bailout. All 10 men jumped. Royal Navy destroyers rescued 9 survivors. The tail gunner was never found. Tondaleo struck the channel at approximately 1,300 hours, sank in less than 3 minutes, and settled in 200 feet of water, wrapped in darkness and kelp. The bomber that had survived 11 sabotage shells at Kassel rested on the seabed. Fox completed his remaining missions in other aircraft, finished his tour in November, and returned to the United States with the Distinguished Flying Cross. Bendiner flew until late November, completed 25 missions, and came home with the Air Medal and 3 oak leaf clusters. After the war, Bendiner became a journalist. He wrote for Esquire and authored several books. In 1980, he published The Fall of Fortresses, a navigator's account of the daylight bombing campaign. It included the story of the sabotage shells. The hidden message. The book circulated among veterans and historians, but the story never reached a wide audience. The Czech worker remained anonymous. During the autumn of 1943, 8th Air Force Ordnance teams examined every unexploded German shell recovered from American aircraft. Patterns emerged. Empty casings, missing explosive filler, defective fuses. By December, intelligence documented 47 confirmed cases of sabotaged ammunition recovered from American bombers. Most contained no messages, just silence where explosions should have been. The Czech resistance operated differently from movements in France or Poland. No uprisings, no guerrilla warfare. The Nazis had crushed Czech military resistance in 1939, executed leaders, dismantled the army, occupied every city. Open rebellion meant collective punishment. Entire villages destroyed. So resistance became systemic and quiet. Factory workers slowed production. Rail workers misrouted supply trains. Farmers hid grain. Clerks lost paperwork. Millions of small acts accumulated into real disruption. German quality control could not stop it. Testing ammunition required firing it. Firing destroyed the shell. They tested samples. 1 in 1,000. 2 in 1,000. The saboteurs learned the patterns. Samples passed. The rest failed in combat. Captured Skoda production records later revealed the truth. Official output matched German quotas, But frontline reports showed explosive failure rates nearly 30% higher than expected. The difference was sabotage. The Germans responded with executions, inspections, terror. But they could not solve the core problem. They needed the workers. They needed the ammunition. They needed it immediately. They chose quantity over reliability. Back in England, Tondileo never flew with Fox again after July 30th. Different crews flew her through August. More damage. More repairs. The waist gunner positions where 2 men died were rebuilt. On September 6th, another crew occupied them. They survived. Tondileo did not. For 35 years, Bendiner believed the aircraft's survival at Kassel had been luck, random chance. Only in 1978 did Fox show him the declassified files. Morrison's report. Hayes' summary. The photograph of 11 empty shells. The truth reframed the war. Not only armies fighting armies, but millions of enslaved workers resisting quietly. Czech machinists, Polish laborers, French railwaymen, Dutch farmers, each taking small risks that accumulated into strategic effect. The saboteur who saved Tondileo's crew almost certainly died. Gestapo records show increased executions in Czech munitions factories in late 1943. The message survived, hidden in intelligence files, preserved in memoirs, passed forward in fragments. It was the story of someone who had nothing, no weapon, no army, no chance of survival if discovered, and yet found a way to fight back and save 10 men they would never meet. Post-war investigations revealed that Czech sabotage extended far beyond ammunition. Aircraft components produced in factories around Prague contained systematic defects. Engine parts machined to incorrect tolerances. Hydraulic fittings drilled with microscopic flaws. Wing rivets deliberately weakened. Each defect invisible during assembly. Each capable of catastrophic failure in combat. Captured German records showed that Messerschmitt fighters built with Czech-manufactured components suffered failure rates over 40% higher than aircraft assembled entirely in Germany. Engines seized mid-flight. Landing gear collapsed on touchdown. Control surfaces separated under stress. The Luftwaffe blamed Allied action, blamed pilot error, blamed material shortages. They never suspected their own supply chain. Sabotage reached armored production as well. Transmission gears produced in occupied Czech factories wore out 3 times faster than German-made equivalents. Panthers and Tigers broke down in large numbers during Operation Citadel at Kursk, leaving crews stranded under Soviet artillery fire. German commanders blamed winter conditions, blamed poor maintenance. They never realized machinists had introduced calculated weaknesses into critical components. British intelligence later estimated that Czech industrial sabotage reduced German war production efficiency by approximately 18%. Not through explosions, not through destroyed factories, through microscopic defects multiplied across millions of parts. A rifle that jammed after 200 rounds instead of 2,000. A radio that failed after 50 hours instead of 500. Artillery shells that tumbled in flight instead of flying true. The genius was in the subtlety. Defects that appeared random, that could be blamed on fatigue, shortages, wartime pressure. The Germans investigated. They executed suspected saboteurs, increased security, added inspections, but they could not solve the central problem. They needed the workers. They needed their skills. They could not replace an entire industrial workforce. Some saboteurs left traces. After the war, a Polish worker's message was found inside the boiler of a captured German locomotive. Written in tiny script, hidden during assembly. For our dead, for our children, we will not forget. The locomotive had functioned perfectly. The message remained hidden until peace. A French resistance survivor later described sabotage at a Renault tank factory outside Paris. Workers assembled fuel tanks to specification, passed leak tests, then drilled a pinhole on the underside, too small to detect without removing the tank. Fuel seeped slowly, evaporated, never pooled. After months of operation, the tanks simply ran dry. Crews blamed faulty gauges, blamed logistics. They never suspected sabotage. The ammunition that saved Tondileo represented thousands of similar acts across occupied Europe. Workers risking execution to create weapons that would fail when used. Most never knew if their acts mattered. A Czech machinist manufacturing defective shells in 1943 would never know if they reached combat. Never know if they failed to explode. Never know if they saved anyone. They worked in darkness. They made their small rebellions. They hoped. The saboteur who hid the message inside that shell wanted something more. They wanted proof. They wanted someone to know. So they wrote 7 words in Czech, rolled the paper tightly, hid it inside a shell casing, sealed the base plate, and sent it into the world, hoping someone would find it. And someone did. 35 years later, on a porch in Tarrytown, New York, when Bon Fox told Elmer Bendiner the truth. When Bendiner published his memoir. When historians began documenting the invisible resistance of occupied Europe. The message survived. But one question remained. How many others had been saved the same way? After the war, Allied intelligence conducted systematic analysis of unexploded German ordnance recovered across Europe, ammunition from crashed aircraft, abandoned depots, battlefield salvage. The results exceeded every estimate. Between 1942 and 1945, approximately 12 million rounds of German small arms and cannon ammunition were manufactured in occupied Czech factories. Post-war testing suggested 8 to 14% contained no explosive filler. That meant nearly 1 million sabotage shells. Each represented a moment when a German weapon failed. A Luftwaffe pilot squeezed the trigger, and nothing happened. An anti-aircraft gun fired harmlessly at Allied bombers. A shell that should have killed did not. No intelligence agency could calculate how many Allied lives were saved. How many B-17s absorbed hits that never detonated. How many fighters survived because cannon shells were hollow. How many missions succeeded because German weapons failed at the critical moment? Tondaleo provided one reference point. 11 shells. 1 aircraft. 10 men saved. If even 1% of sabotaged ammunition reached combat aircraft, the impact would be measured in thousands of lives. The Gestapo never identified the saboteur who wrote the message. Captured security records showed increased executions at Czech munitions factories in late 1943 and early 1944. Names removed from rosters. Workers vanished. The Nazis suspected sabotage but could not prove individual guilt. So they killed randomly. It did not stop the resistance. Defective ammunition continued to roll off assembly lines through 1945, even as Allied armies closed in from east and west. Elmer Bendiner died in September 2001, aged 81. He spent his final decades making sure the story was told, that Tondaleo's survival was not luck or divine intervention, but human courage. Bon Fox died in 1995, aged 76. He kept the translated message in his desk drawer for 17 years. He showed it to his children and grandchildren and explained that some of the bravest acts of war happened far from battlefields, in factories, in labor camps, in silence. The 11 shells from Tondaleo's fuel tank remained stored at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until 1992, when they were transferred to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. They sit in a display case today. 11 empty shells. 7 words. Physical evidence of an invisible war, and proof that resistance does not always wear a uniform.